Ezekiel Elliott's rushing attempts prop is 13.5.
I think you smashed the over on that.
Have to. You have to.
If the game's relatively close.
Even if it's, relatively, exactly. Yo, what is going on, everybody? We are back. Thursday night football. It's the first one of the season, the Awesemo.com NFL strategy show. I'm Dave Loughran, joined as always by Matt Gajewski, the wizard when it comes to the football world. Follow the man at Matt_Gajewski. Follow me at Loughy_D, LOUGHY_D on the Twitters. Happy to have all of you with us. As always, it's going to be a fun show, and we got a ton of NFL stuff coming up today, along with MLB, whatever it is, whatever you're looking for, we got you right here on the Awesemo channel. Matt, we're back, baby. We did one yesterday for the main slate, and here we are again talking Showdown, Bucks, Cowboys, Thursday night football.
Yeah, yesterday was a ton of fun, but this one just feels a little more real with the game, in 12 hours from now, a little bit less than 12 hours at this point. We got to dive into like real injuries. We've had injury reports all week, what we think these teams are going to do. And it's a showdown, so we get to really get into the weeds with some of these ancillary options.
For sure. And I don't know if our mics were hot. Were our mics hot when we were talking about Elliott, Jordan? Yes and no. I don't know what that. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah, they were lukewarm. We're going to hit on some of our favorite bets, whether it's just sides or totals or a couple props. I think we got some good ones for you late in the show. But first, Matt, the biggest thing before we get into any of the before we get into the weeds here is, well, I should say, welcome to all of you guys and hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet. Helps us immensely. And subscribe to the channel if you're new here. We love all of you. You're all welcome here on the Awesemo channel. And if you're watching this after the fact, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you think, who your top options are, and who's taking us to the promised land tonight. But anyway, Matt, showdown strategy. There are some people that might be a little rusty when it comes to showdowns for NFL. I think I am too. Even working through this process today, we'll bring it all back pretty quickly. But it's a lot different than like NBA showdowns for sure. Because in NBA showdowns, you're generally playing the guys with the highest usage, with the highest ceiling, the Giannis Antetokounmpos, as we watched like NFL or NBA postseason and finals, or LeBron James or whoever that may be. But in football, it is a little bit different because it could be a quarterback that has a huge game, but his receiver has a bigger game, or the running back, or a defense, as we've seen on multiple occasions, not suggesting you do that. What type of process for you goes into strategy here? How are you looking to work guys into the captain or the MVP spots and fill out your rosters? And what type of correlation are you looking for as well? Again, no real correlation in basketball.
Yeah, in football, I think the first thing you need to determine is what type of contest you're playing. It's going to be drastically different if you're playing something like the Millie Maker versus cash versus just like 100-man field tournament, something like that. And that all has to do with how different you need to be. You don't want a lot of duplicated lineups in your pool, even if you're running just one. Ideally, that would be a unique lineup. And for large field tournaments, that means you're going to have to get a little crazier. If you're playing cash, small field, you can play a little closer to the chalk with your quarterbacks, your optimal captains. But in large field tournaments, you want to do things like maybe consider some under projected captains, leave some salary on the table, or get into some weird game script environments. But if we're treating this from an optimal perspective, like playing cash, generally, I just want the highest projected captains. The quarterbacks, if it's a team that runs the ball a lot, give me those bell cow running backs. Throw in correlated plays. Like if you're captaining a quarterback, you obviously want to play some receivers. So those are all considerations. And we'll dive into the specifics with this game and what we think could possibly happen.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, I think it's fair to say that there's less dupes in football than there are in basketball.
Oh, for sure. There's just so many more players.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And in football, with basketball, right, if you have a bench player that plays 10 minutes off the bench and scores 8 points with an assist and a rebound, okay, cool. But you could have in football one player who has one target and it's a 70-yard touchdown, right? And that's the difference. You can have so many things go crazy. You can have a huge defensive game where they run back 2 pick sixes. Like there's just a lot of different variables, a lot of ways things can go right, a lot of the ways things can go wrong. So with that in mind, are you ever looking at it? Are you ever looking at, say, lesser owned, maybe lower projected, but still have that ceiling guys in a captain spot our boy I'm a Tulsa dog will love this, but I think it's apropos when it comes to today's slate. Like, what about a Ronald Jones or something? And I'm just throwing out one guy who's people are, kind of sketchy on him. He wasn't the main man in the playoffs behind Leonard Fournette. You bring in Giovanni Bernard, but Ronald Jones is actually a good running back who, when he gets chances, ends up putting up numbers. Like, how do you feel about someone like him in there, or maybe a Michael Gallup? I'm just throwing names out.
Yeah, I get what you're doing. You're trying to do like mainstays in offense, but not the top projected guys. I see what you're saying.
Correct.
And like the benefit of doing this show last year is I really learned a lot about Showdown, just like talking with you through the process and stuff. And one mistake I made really early on in the year was being overweight in captain slot on a lot of these like really ancillary plays. Like, think your wide receiver threes, if there's a timeshare in the backfield, like timeshare backs, things like that. And then I came to realize throughout the year when some of these lineups weren't winning at a high enough rate. And to use tonight, for example, you have players like Gronkowski, players like Ronald Jones, who are sub 20% owned already. How different does your lineup really have to be, especially if you're just playing mid-stakes contests, like mid-field size tournaments? How different does your lineup have to be if it includes a Ronald Jones at captain, if it includes somebody like Gronk at captain who's projected for under 15%? And the answer is it doesn't really have to be that different when you're making some of those decisions. So it's always going to be a balance. If you have a low-owned play in your lineup, you can play some chalk around it as long as you're not playing something just like the Millie Maker or these large field lottos.
Okay, two more things. One, we always know if you're playing a quarterback or a wide receiver at captain, it's pretty easy to get that correlation. When you play a running back, right? Let's say Jones or Zeke or Fournette at the captain or the MVP spot, is there any process you take to filling out all of those flex spots that, maybe you want the quarterback and two of his receivers, you're hoping they have a good game, but not a blow up game? Is there anything different you do when you have a running back at captain and not just in a flex spot?
You always want to use correlation to some degree. So I think there's a couple scenarios you could look to. We'll use Dallas for an example here because they have a clear lead runner in Zeke. So Zeke is your captain. There's a scenario where Dallas blows out Tampa Bay. I know that's not likely. Tampa Bay's a sizable favorite, but say it happens for this example. You have a case where there's a blowout here. Zeke gets there with maybe multiple touchdowns, but if it gets out of hand, you still could have Dallas pass catchers and Dak get there and run something like a 5-1 stack. We've seen those work where you just have one Tampa Bay on the other side. Conversely, if you think the game is high scoring and stays close, Zeke is highly correlated with the other team's passing game. Say Dallas gets up early in this game, Tampa Bay has to play from behind, throw a bunch of touchdowns with Tom Brady and some pass catchers. So there's a couple avenues to exploit correlation with a running back captain, and you can do that for almost any position.
And the last thing to touch on, then we're diving straight into it here. But I think all this is important. We need a little refresher here after it being a long time since we've done this. Contest size is huge when it comes to how different you want to get, Matt. Like, if you're trying to be super contrarian, you don't necessarily need to do that in some of these smaller field single entry contests. Sometimes just making the distinction between one player, or like you said, a captain spot where you can go chalky throughout the rest of your lineup. So just saying single entry doesn't tell the whole story. There are some single entry contests out there with like 50,000 entries in them. But I do think, and I know you would agree with me, that contest size and contest selection is super important whenever you're asking questions about a lineup or whenever you're trying to figure out how different you need to be.
For sure. I think it's the most important variable you have when taking a look at your lineups. If you're playing something like 100 contest or 100-man contest, you don't really have to be that different. You could probably still run a unique lineup with either quarterback in your captain slot, running both quarterbacks and finding one little pivot. Whereas if you're playing the Millie Maker and there's hundreds of thousands of entries, you're going to have to be a little bit different in order to find uniques or at least lineups that aren't heavily duplicated.
You ready to do this?
Yeah, man, let's dive in.
Let's do it. And if you guys want to follow along too, with all the ownership and the projections and everything we have, the rankings right now, if you use the promo code DAK, like the quarterback in tonight's game, DAK, you will get our Awesemo Plus Express NFL package or pass for $1 single for the week. It includes a ton of stuff. If you go to awesemo.com/join, check out everything it has to offer. We even have tiers, the NFL tiers, ownership and projections. Now we have everything you need. All of our single game and showdown content now is included in this Express Pass. If you're a season-long player, we have the start-sit rankings, the waiver wire tool, the rest of season projections, and a lot more for that. We have the lineup builder. There's so much more stuff. Like I don't even have time. I don't have time to go all through all of it, but all these tools created, designed, used by Alex Baker himself. You know him as Awesemo, #1 ranked DFS player out there. Check it out. $1. Use the promo code DAC. If you're not a sub yet, maybe you've been hesitant. Maybe you've been burned by bad sites in the past and you have some trepidation. For $1, you can check out everything we have to offer. Just use the promo code DAC for the Express Weekly NFL Pass. $1 single, all of those tools, all that content, and more that I'm actually forgetting right now. So see for yourself, awesemo.com/promos. All right, dude, let's do it. Diving straight into the Cowboys. Not a very hefty total here. 21.5, Matt, in a game that has a total, an actual game total north of 50. They're 8.5-point road dogs. This is a team, and we'll get into it later, that retooled their defense to the point where they're introducing 8 new starters in week 1. But the offense, to me, is what's interesting. Dak Prescott's returning. We'll see how his shoulder is. Zach Martin is out in the offensive line, but they're otherwise should be okay. And you've got CeeDee Lamb in his second year. Amari Cooper, who was away from the team, away from the field for a while, seemingly back to full health. Michael Gallup, and then Ezekiel Elliott, who struggled last year but ran behind an awful line on a team that was playing from behind. So while Tampa Bay brought basically everybody back, Dallas is going to look significantly different, and I think there's a ton of uncertainty here, both on offense and on defense, probably less on offense, though.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the biggest piece of uncertainty comes from their injury situation, and I don't really want to call it an injury situation. You just have some players on the COVID list, in particular, Zach Martin, who I think is a huge loss for this team. Luckily, it's still not even as bad as this offensive line was at times last year, where they were missing 3-4 starters for extended periods of time. So I still think you have an upgrade in the run game for Ezekiel Elliott overall. And having the continuity in pass catchers, I think, is nice. It's an offense we already kind of wanted to target, just with the kind of offense they run. It's up tempo, it's pass heavy. They're kind of built the right way with all these pass catchers, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, and Michael Gallup. So I do think they'll be able to score points. The interesting question for the game overall, when it relates to things like the total and probably how you want to build your lineups, is how much can this Dallas team score on what I would consider a pretty elite Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And I think that will be a huge determinant in contest tonight.
No question. The Bucs were first in run defense DVOA last year. They were 5th in pass defense DVOA. I mean, they have this is a really good defense. I
think they're better too.
Yeah, they might be. And what's crazy is the flow of this game can dictate everything, right? Like if it's competitive, I think Ezekiel Elliott still gets a lot of work and probably grinds his way to a decent enough game just on volume alone. If Dallas goes down early, we remember what happened when they went down early on in the season last year before Dak Prescott got hurt. I mean, he was on pace to shatter single season passing records, and he has the weapons to play catch up. So how do we approach this offense right now? I don't want to say like, are you captaining Dak? Because obviously we're going to have Dak captain spots. We're going to have a lot of captain spots when it comes to these premier skill players for the Dallas Cowboys. So I'll ask you in this way. How do you see this one playing out today if you had to? Because when it comes to football, again, unlike basketball and unlike these other sports where it comes to showdown, you kind of have to throw a narrative out there and build around the story of the way you think the game is going to go.
For sure. And I think particularly in the smaller field stuff, you can get crazy in large field and kind of go against some of the conventional wisdom. But for Dallas in particular, I do think they're going to be playing from behind. They just have significant weaknesses on their defense compared to what Tampa Bay is going to bring to the table, both on offense and on defense. I think Tampa Bay has a slight advantage in both. Like you mentioned, continuity at every single position. Their defense has done nothing but improve, which is pretty crazy. Like they spent a first-round pick on Joe Tryon. He's going to be an edge rusher, and I'm not even sure he's going to play outside of just rotational snaps, which is crazy. Deep at linebacker with Devin White, with Levante David, strong corners. They really hit a diamond in the rough in Sean Bunting, former Central Michigan player. And then you look at Dallas on defense. They've had nothing but injuries. Like even up front, Neville Gallimore, Tristan Hill, injuries there. Their corners are weak. Trevon Diggs, who's kind of an unproven second-year player out of Alabama, is going to have to lead this unit. Their strength is linebacker, but that leaves a lot of openings against the Tampa Bay team that's going to stretch you 3 wide with Antonio Brown, with Mike Evans, with Chris Godwin. It's going to be difficult, I think, for Dallas to defend Tampa Bay, which makes me think they're going to be playing from behind. And in those situations, in small field, looking primarily at Dak and, of course, stacking him with some of these pass catchers.
How worried are you about this Bucs pass rush being just a menacing presence when it comes to Dak being able to stay upright? I mean, he can move if he needs to, but the Bucs were 8th in pass rush according to PFF last year, 78 grade, and I would assume they're going to be good again this season. Are there any concerns about that? And if so, who benefits the most? Would it be CeeDee Lamb?
There are concerns. I think you want Dallas ideally to get the ball out of Dak's hands quickly.
Yeah.
And it's hard to really find a main beneficiary. Usually in those kind of situations, you like slot receivers, sort of these low ADOT guys that can open, release quickly, catch the ball, and try to make plays with yards after catch opportunities. Dallas is interesting because they rotate their receivers so much. So for portions of the time, you get Amari in the slot, you get CeeDee Lamb in the slot quite a bit. And even this preseason, there's been a lot of talk of moving Gallup in and out of the slot after he was primarily just a boundary receiver last year. So I don't necessarily think there's one beneficiary from the pass rush. I think you'll see them trying to mix and match their pass catchers in and out of the slot.
Okay. CeeDee Lamb was in the slot 93% of the time last year, though. That's a lot.
This will be really interesting to see because they're like, okay, we're going to put Gallup in the slot more,
right?
Whether they're just like blowing smoke or if that's actually, if they're going to just keep CeeDee in the slot. And CeeDee, I mean, was super productive in the slot.
Right. But he could also, you're saying the guy could also be pretty productive outside as well.
Yeah. I think we have to decipher coach speak a little bit. And it was interesting. They talked about Gallup in the slot, and I didn't really see him play there that much in the preseason. But again, we're talking about sample sizes of like 12 snaps overall. So it's really hard to gather anything from. I think the safe bet is going somebody like CeeDee, who already showed he can do it. That's kind of our baseline, and any changes we make from there have to do with this coach speak and what we've seen in limited samples. So I think CeeDee is probably the safest bet for like that slot role.
Yeah, I like CeeDee Lamb a lot today. And not just because he's in the slot, but I do think if you're forced to get the ball out of your hands quickly, it's going to be pretty impactful. I mean, you look at last year, someone like Ben Roethlisberger, there wasn't a single quarterback that held onto the ball for less time per play in the pocket than Ben Roethlisberger. And we all know why, right? It was pretty obvious. And guys like Juju, while his yardage totals were underwhelming, had a ton of PPR production. Deontay Johnson being another one, even though these aren't a lot of downfield passes. And then Chase Claypool, when Rhett Ben did have some time, would be the one to light it up, Matt. But will that be the case today? I don't necessarily know. I think week one is always kind of difficult. We don't know what Dallas's defense is going to look like. We don't know if I know you don't think they're going to be good. I'm with you. But I don't know if they're going to be bad to the point where they just can't stop anything. And that's right, where it gets interesting.
Yeah, like last year.
Right, where, you remember that Cleveland Browns game where it was over by the time it started. And
yeah,
Cleveland did everything just by running the ball down their throats. Even Odell Beckham had a 55-yard touchdown run.
And what the pieces they had in place last year, they weren't good, but the good pieces they did have, many of them were injured, just kind of exacerbating their problems. Like you have Leighton Vander Esch back. I think he's one of the better linebackers, kind of a devalued position, but I sort of like what they're doing on defense overall. They're building with a lot of these like hybrid players. They took Keanu Neil, who's former safety from Atlanta, had a lot of injury problems, but they listed him at linebacker. He should be kind of like a nickel backer, coverage backer, covering tight ends and running backs out of the backfield, which is kind of that modern day position you like. They drafted a guy from LSU and Jabril Cox in kind of the same mold. A Parsons, another linebacker they took. You can see a lot of these guys are labeled linebackers, but they kind of have this dual positionality and versatility on defense. I think Parsons could be a phenomenal edge rusher for them, a great blitzer at Penn State. So I like what they're doing. I just think they're probably a few years away from building an elite defense, whereas Tampa Bay already has it.
All right, so let's do this then. Of Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and I hate to ask you to rank these guys because it's like if you're playing multiple lineups, if you're playing, you're gonna try and rotate through these guys, especially when you have a receiving core as good as this. And I must say, this game is tough because both teams have three receivers, and even you could say what you want about Gallup, but he's still good enough to where you have to talk about him. Like they both have three receivers in Gallup, Lamb, and Cooper, and then in Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, and then throw Gronk in there if you want. And then they have running backs, one of them with a rotation. Like, there are a lot of ways that this game can go. So final thoughts on how the Cowboys' main skill players shake out for you, and then, main receivers. And then let's talk about the running game a little bit.
I think they're priced efficiently as far as like order of pricing. Amari Cooper, I think he should be the most expensive. CD Lamb, he's right behind him, like right behind him on DraftKings. For that reason, I guess if you're splitting hairs, I would go with Amari Cooper. But like you said, multiple lineups, you want both these guys. Gallup's a little bit cheaper, but he's still pretty close in price to Amari and CD, where I'm probably just going to try to get up to one of those two receivers if possible. But you always have that kind of consolation prize. If you can't get them, Gallup being cheaper does benefit your lineups. You can still get an attachment to a Dallas Pats game with, a cheaper Gallup. I like the tight ends a little bit. I think they're going to split time this year a little bit more. It's Jarwin and Dalton Schultz. They've both been playing in the preseason, splitting reps there. We were kind of hoping Jarwin would take the job himself, but for the purposes of Showdown, they should both play a little bit here. If one of them catches a touchdown, could be a nice, really cheap flex option and attachment to this offense. And seeing some people ask questions in the chat, like for onslaughts, who do you like for run backs? Saw a super chat. I think taking a look at pass catchers makes a lot of sense. In onslaught situations, generally you're not going to have a lot of salary left unless you just completely punt all the pass catchers. But like, think about onslaughts from either team's perspective. You're going to have the quarterback. That's one of the most expensive players. You probably have a fairly expensive rusher. If you're playing Dallas, you certainly do an Ezekiel Elliott. If you're stacking Dak and you have Elliott in your lineup, you're likely playing one or two of Amari, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, a tight end. You're not going to have a lot of salary left. You probably want to spend that on a pass catcher. One, because you're not going to be able to afford a quarterback. Two, if it's an onslaught situation to begin with, it's probably likely that the opposing signal caller is not playing that well to begin with. In a PPR format where you have cheap points per reception, it's a decent likelihood that one of those pass catchers outscores your signal caller just based on your signal caller underperforming. So I'm looking at receivers mainly and run backs to onslaughts. But did the Dallas breakdown make sense? Is that how you would rank the pass catchers?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you make a good point in that, yes, Gallup's a fine consolation prize, but he's not so much cheaper than CD and Amari that you're prioritizing him. Like, if Gallup was down there at 4,200, I think you and I would both be saying right now, like, dude, just play Gallup because he has that potential. I don't know his yards per route run, or I'm sorry, his routes run per drop back, but it's kind of not important when the guy ran 631 routes last year. Matt, he ran the second most routes in the league. And I say that because a lot of, most people be like, well, yeah, but what did he do on those? Understandably so. But what the point being is that Michael Gallup is going to be on the field for, unless it's a lot different than last year. And I'm not necessarily, I don't think it will be. I don't see any way. Gallup, I think what did he play? Like 98% of snaps last year. He's always on the field.
Yeah. I mean, he's a full-time player in this offense. Dallas doesn't run a lot of like non-11 personnel sets. They're basically in three wide every single play. They do not rotate their receivers outside of a few plays here and there throughout the game. So Gallup's going to play the whole game. And I mean, last year he had a pretty good target share. We're talking 17%
on a team that threw 1,000 times a game.
Yeah. And we're expecting them to be up tempo, trailing, still pass heavy. Gallup's completely fine. Plus he's like their downfield stretch guy. So he has the chance to catch like really big splash plays, which obviously gets you there in Showdown.
And can I just say, when it comes to target share, don't just look at the percentage. Look at how much a team is throwing. If you know what I mean? If you have a 25% target share on a team that throws 25 times per game, or a 17% target share on a team that throws 43 times per game, just keep that in mind. All things are not equal. Do you think Lamb's snap count rises this year? Because he actually he was only playing like 60 or so percent of snaps over the last half of the season.
I think so. I mean, just rookie season, no offseason because of COVID. He's clearly, I think, a top 2 pass catcher for that team. That's where I would tend to lean. I'm pulling up their snap counts from last year. It's interesting to look at Lamb because even towards the tail end of the season, he was never like a 90% snap
51,
guy.
57, 51, 74 to close out the year.
Which in the 74 is positive. But like you mentioned, And again, it's not like they're rotating tight ends or something on the field. They're in 11 most of the time, but you saw Cedric Wilson and Noah Brown play a decent amount in rotations for them throughout the year. I think just in the second year, CeeDee Lamb probably takes a jump forward. I don't know if any of these guys are going to be like 95% the whole year, but I think they'll be pretty high.
Just quickly, because I want to make sure we get through all this. We'll build a lineup at the end, give you our top bets, a couple props I really like for this game. Any thoughts on somebody like Jarwin?
Yeah, I think Jarwin and Dalton Schultz are great in large field, really, really large field tournaments because they're splitting time. There's a lot of uncertainty. People aren't going to click their names, and they still have a decent probability of scoring in the offense. Like in particular, I think you get Dalton Schultz, pretty low ownership overall. He's somebody I would look to. I'm probably not captaining either. And that comes down to what we discussed earlier. Like if you have a captain, like even Michael Gallup right now, based on our projections, he is projected for 4.6 captain ownership. Your lineup is super different with Gallup already in the captain. And he's a guy we just talked about probably on the field almost every snap.
For sure.
I don't think you need to play Jarwin in captain, but in, I guess, utility slots in big large field GPPs, Jarwin makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And then lastly, with Ezekiel Elliott, you and I were talking about this before the show started. I know there was a lot of hype surrounding Tony Pollard. And I mean, I found that ridiculous in season-long leagues and best ball leagues that guys like A.J. Dillon and Tony Pollard were being drafted ahead of Gus Edwards. And I say this before J.K. Dobbins went down, Matt, because and you don't have to agree with me, but
I do.
Dobbins was actually someone that had utility anyway. He was already like a 10 touch per guy or per game player who got red zone looks. There was this assumption, I guess, that Tony Pollard was going to, secede or just usurp, I should say, Ezekiel Elliott in his offense. It's the silliest thing ever to me. And I'm not saying he won't be out there a little bit, but I still think Ezekiel Elliott is going to get the clear lion's share of work.
Yeah, I agree with you. They haven't really shown any indication, except for last year on a lost season, that they were going to put Tony Pollard out there more. Zeke is a guy they've invested in. They've used as a bell cow throughout his career. He's still relatively young. I don't really see a lot of indications pointing towards Ezekiel Elliott not handling most of the workload here. And you can spin this both ways. I remember seeing the stat a lot earlier this offseason. I think you and I may have talked about it, but just there's like metrics that Sports Info Solutions, I can't remember if it was them or Pro Football Focus, charts on running backs missing their assignments, missing blocks, things like that. And Tony Pollard was one of the leaders in the entire NFL in players that just were missing like their assignments on plays, which obviously doesn't bode well for things like coaching staff and playing time.
No, they hate that.
And Elliott never does that.
No, that's a good, I remember that was talking about that back in like June or July when Tony Pollard.
Hayden Winks tweeted it.
Okay. From Underdog. Yeah. No, that's somebody different. I thought that was him.
He's on Underdog.
Underdog. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. I was looking to try to find the exact one.
Do you think Elliott's just too expensive to have a lot invested in today? I mean, obviously he can do big things but he is getting a lot of ownership. His captain spot ownership on DraftKings, at least, is the third highest on the slate. What are your thoughts on Elliott here from a captain spot standpoint? He is the third. He's actually the highest priced player on the slate, not including quarterbacks.
I actually kind of like Elliott in the captain slot. You can get him at 9% ownership. He has a path to a ceiling in multiple scenarios. Even if they're playing from behind, as we've talked about, like Elliott's a really good pass catcher. And maybe we shouldn't say really good, but he's utilized there. And
look how many targets he's had over the past 2 seasons.
Last year, he had a 12% target share.
Yep.
Like that's phenomenal for a running back. And then you're also kind of flipping game script on its head. And this is something you and I hit on a lot last year. These games go awry all the time. All the time. Like just because the spread's projected, and I do agree with the spread for what it's worth, but I'm not right all the time. Neither are bookmakers. If you even see Dallas get the opening kickoff, march down the field and get a score, they're automatically playing with a lead or at least neutral game script for a while. That could give Elliott a chance to see a decent amount of work as a pass catcher. And if he scores some touchdowns, there's a clear path to a ceiling.
Absolutely. And like you said, 12% target share last year. He's had 72, and 95 targets over his last 3 seasons. That's stellar for a guy that could give you 300 carries. Now, granted, if they're better this year, you won't get that, but he'll be involved one way or another. Anybody else on Dallas?
I think we hit most people. One last construction I want to talk about at least a little bit is this double running back, which is something I like a lot in large field tournaments. We just talked about how we think Ezekiel Elliott is going to be the lead back, which I do believe, but there's a situation where maybe we're wrong and they didn't like what they saw at Elliott at the end of last year. They're going to use Tony Pollard a little more. There's a scenario it's probably more viable with the Tampa Bay backs for what it's worth. But in large field, you could play both of them. It's going to be a significantly under-owned build. It's likely not going to work out for you, but in the chance it does, not very many people are going to have it.
What about the double running back build with, say, like Elliott and Ronald Jones in the same team, and just take the approach that, hey, maybe this game will surprise people and both teams will produce on the ground? I know it's unlikely given the Dallas Cowboys side, but I could see, let's actually make the transition and you can answer this question. I could see Tampa Bay putting up big numbers on the ground today as well.
For sure. I mean, most of Dallas's interior on the defensive line is injured, which isn't good. That automatically is kind of a little boost to Tampa Bay's run game. But at the same time, I don't even think a lot needs to go right. Even if they play neutral football, you could just have a situation where the run game dominates touchdowns. And that's how you get there. So you could definitely play both running backs, especially in Showdown. I think in cash games, low risk contests today, it's probably not optimal, but it's certainly viable.
I'll tell you what though, man, we'll start with the running backs here on the other side.
Oh, okay.
Why? Just a mess?
Yeah,
it is, but it's intriguing. And I'll tell you why it's intriguing, right? DraftKings in Vegas, especially with golf and certain sports, right, are very aligned most of the time. I mean, oftentimes the pricing for golf is parallel with what the odds look like. Today, though, and this is where I'm kind of fascinated by it, Leonard Fournette has a rushing attempts prop of 7.5, Matt. Ronald Jones is at 11.5, okay? Leonard Fournette total yards 50.5, Ronald Jones 55.5. Granted, these are just props, but I'm throwing it out there for you. Now, you would think that Leonard Fournette, if it's not Gio, is probably going to be involved as the pass catcher, but he is significantly more expensive than Ronald Jones on DraftKings. He's $2,000 more expensive than Ronald Jones.
That's a bit egregious to me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I don't think there should be that big of a price difference for really anyone in this backfield.
No.
I think you can just go.
You're including Gio?
Probably not Gio. Like, this kind of reminds me of like the Patriots from last year where you have just like low upside pass catcher. Like, I think Gio is more of a filler in your lineups, a safer play that gets you, to a certain point value, but he's really cheap.
Be a good onslaught play though. In the sense that, like, if you need that last guy in on a full-out Tampa onslaught, you just minimum salary Gio.
The reason why, I don't like Gio a ton is because you have Tampa Bay as huge favorites. He has a clear role. It's pass catching downs. In the game script that Vegas is projecting, that bookmakers are projecting, Gio is probably not going to see a lot of work. So I'm completely with you that you probably want to isolate Fournette and Jones. Based on price, Jones is just like the best value pretty clearly.
Yeah. Agreed.
But I think there are game scenarios that you could, maybe this is like a Ezekiel Elliott captain lineup where you have a really cheap Gio on the other side because of just pure PPR value. And that's a situation where Gio maybe maximizes the ceiling as a pass catcher when Tampa Bay's trailing.
Right. No doubt. And you know what, even if they're not trailing, and I said minimum salary, but you know what I meant, like the cheapest viable guy pretty much, even if like they're not trailing, your hope is that Gio rips off a big run a big reception. That's what it comes down to. Zero interest in captain spotting someone like that. But I assume, or I suppose what I'm saying too, is if you go like Brady captain, and then you just assume that they're going to crush this team, or it's going to be a shootout. Let's just say it's a shootout, and you go Brady captain, but then you go Mike Evans, and you throw, Godwin in there, you're definitely going to be limited in what your options are. But I think the one advantage, and it's going to be bared out for sure when it comes to ownership, is that Antonio Brown also has a really reasonable price point at 5,600.
That's pretty ridiculous. And basically when we had all these pass catchers healthy last year, target shares, they weren't even across the board. You had slight preference towards Godwin. Antonio Brown certainly propped up by that like 15 target game Brady peppered him with to get him that bonus last year. He had a contractual bonus where if he had so many receptions, he made like an extra $500,000. Ridiculous. So he had like 15 targets in one game. But excluding all that, their target shares were relatively smooth and even across the board. So Antonio Brown stands out similar to Ronald Jones as just the clear value pass catcher, not just on Tampa Bay, but I think in both offenses.
Yeah. I mean, of the 8 games that Antonio Brown played, he and Mike Evans were actually tied in targets. Granted, Evans only played a little bit of that week 17 game, but still, all 3 of these guys have just slate breaking upside. And what I find interesting about Antonio Brown too, Matt, is yes, he's getting up there in age, but he only played, what was it? One game between 2019 or 2018 and 19. No, I'm sorry. He only played 1 game in 2019. And then he only played 8 games last year. So he had plenty of time off. It's not like he was destroying his body. Who knows what he was doing off the field. But when it comes to Antonio Brown, it was a COVID season. He joins the team midway through the year and just kind of settles right in. I'm interested to see what he can do with a full offseason of work. No COVID interfering with that. No off the field shit getting in the way. Could be, really though, it could be another great season. Before, this is nuts to me. Before Antonio Brown, all this crap happened, right? The 5 seasons before that, he was the wide receiver 1, 2, and 5. He's one of the best to ever do it from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, those numbers are just mind-boggling. Downright ridiculous. One thing I've been considering a lot is just like we have Antonio Brown at this weird price point. There's not really anybody else with his ceiling in that range, at least I think from a median perspective.
Agreed.
His ownership is still not very high, like 24%. And the one I really want to focus on, I do think his utility comes up, but his captain ownership, 5.5%.
Wow.
I don't really see that rising either, just because ahead of him, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Ezekiel Elliott, CeeDee Lamb, the 2 QBs, those are marquee names. I think one of these ways you can gain some leverage in large field tournaments and still feel very good about your lineup is captaining a guy like Antonio Brown. He has 5% ownership in the captain slot, gives you a ton of differentiation, and you don't have to be that weird with your utility spots because you already have a 5% captain.
You're absolutely right. I mean, think about this. How often do you get a guy like Antonio Brown? And neither you or myself are saying that he's the Antonio Brown of 2017, right? Like, not saying that. But what if he's 80% of that and you're getting him at that price and people are still overlooking him at that salary?
For sure.
Go ahead.
For
man.
sure. Just like target shares, you had last year, Mike Evans, 18%, Chris Godwin, 18.9%. And then you look down to Antonio Brown, 20.2%. These are very similar.
Yeah. And granted, in terms of just overall, deep balls and air yards and just yards per target, it is going to be Mike Evans that has that real huge, deep ball down the sideline. But it doesn't mean Antonio Brown can't give you some yards after the catch, can't rack him up, and can't still score. So I think we're on the same page there. What about Evans and Godwin, just to wrap up the pass catchers here? And if you want to hit on Gronk and anyone else in this passing game, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I think they're both completely fine. I like Godwin a little bit more than what we've seen out of Mike Evans. We know Evans is going to be pure boundary. I don't think it matters a ton in this, just like little price break going to Godwin over Mike Evans, slightly higher target share historically. It's similar to CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper. I think you're splitting hairs, but if you're forcing me to do it, it would be Godwin. Gronk is kind of in the same situation as the tight ends we talked about on Dallas. You're going to have him in a timeshare with preferably just OJ Howard, but Cameron Brate will play a little bit too. I'm not sure how that's going to split out because he had Brate injured most of the preseason, OJ Howard coming off a significant injury himself. And we've seen Gronk basically in a timeshare for most of his time with Tampa Bay. So when he's out there, there's a chance he scores touchdowns. We saw it particularly in the postseason, but I do think it's similar to like Jarwin and Dalton Schultz, where it's not like a locked in every single down snap kind of guy.
For sure. Joseph Cavallo says, I believe Zeke's price point is a reflection of him being the only playable running back tonight from a fantasy perspective. It's nearly impossible to start a Bucs running back, 99% impossible. I tell you what, on a showdown slate, the Bucs running backs could be the difference maker. No question about it. I mean, at Rojo's price, I don't know if he's going to be the lead back, man. I don't know what this backfield's going to look like, but that uncertainty could open up a ton of potential for you to win with a $5,400 Ronald Jones. It's in the cards for sure.
Right. And I don't even think either of you are wrong. Like, I think Joseph's right in cash. Like, I don't want to.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't want to touch him. I'm talking about large field tournaments.
Yeah. You said something to me the other day. It was like uncertainty breeds upside or something. I can't remember.
Uncertainty breeds opportunity. A little thing I came up with.
Yeah. Well, I really like that phrase. It's really good. And I think people should embrace that in Showdown. So like when I see these running back by committee situation, a lot of people shy away from it. They don't really like it. I'm kind of the opposite.
You have to be.
Yeah.
You don't have to go insane. You don't have to go totally insane, but it's not like Ronald Jones is some off the wall play. And let me just go back to this one more time. He has a rushing attempts prop of 11.5, right? And it's juiced to the over. So if you're saying, okay, this guy is 5,400 in a single game slate and he's projected for 11, 12 rushing attempts against the defense that allowed 159 rushing yards per game last year and is totally a question mark coming into this season. And, oh, I'm sorry, Matt, we didn't even mention this. The Bucs are 8.5-point favorites at home. I mean, the game script is sets up perfectly for one of these running backs to do something big. We just don't know who it's going to be.
100%. That's why I still think they're very good plays overall. And like there's some really cool like onslaughts you can do with some of these runners, and particularly on Tampa Bay using them both even.
For sure. Chris says this slate's giving me a headache. Yeah, Chris, this is not an easy one to dive into with the first one of the year for sure.
But it's fun.
It's a ton of fun. You get some of those games where there's a few really obvious plays, but it's been a while, Matt, since we've seen ownership spread out this much on a showdown slate. I mean, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 guys above 20, 26 or above ownership. They're spread out. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. It's going to be tough, especially if you're single entering. But like Matt said, maybe just make one real distinction, and then you can do whatever you want elsewhere. All right, Matt, defense, kickers. This just feels like one of those games where I have some real reservations about going with defenses, but I don't know, maybe Tampa. It's just so tough to feel great about that with so many great skill players.
Yeah, I think your edge with defenses is including them in your large field. Maybe if you're running like 150 or maybe you're even just running 20, like slightly bumping them just because you know you're going to get a big edge in just like your leverage score there. But overall, I think small field tournaments, cash games, you probably want to ignore them in this spot.
We got 63 likes with 430 people watching, 14.6%. Right. I won't be able to say hi to my wife and kid tonight if we can't get to at least 100 likes. Just hang my head in shame and close the door and sleep in the office. But no, really, if you guys enjoy this, hit that thumbs up. Help us get to 100. It's the first show of the year, man. Matt's spitting that fire. We're going up for another 11 minutes and then turning it over to the strategy show. But whether you hit the like or not, whether you subscribe to the channel or not, we are happy to have you with us because we love doing this stuff. All right, Matt. And we're doing a giveaway over at Twitter, $1,000 yearly pass. All you have to do is predict who has more passing yards tonight between Dak or Tom Brady, and then just follow the rules on the graphic. Pretty simple, throwing your hat in the ring to get an all access, everything included, Awesemo Plus yearly pass. So check that out for sure. Here's where it gets fun. We just hit on that. I'll ask you one more thing though. Captain spot, single entry. Who are you going with?
What's the field size?
We'll say large, and we'll say like 20K to first.
I think Antonio Brown's a great option there.
And sorry, like $12, 20K to first, you know.
Okay. So like a midfield size tournament.
Yeah.
I honestly think there's a couple ways you could do it. You could do something like an Antonio Brown captain, run mostly chalk with the rest of your lineup because you're so differentiated at captain. Or you could do something like a Tom Brady, Dak Prescott captain, get weird with one of your flex spots, maybe like a Blake Jarwin or Tony Pollard or some uncorrelated play. Maybe it's both running backs from a certain side, but I think there's a couple ways you could do it. And again, like an Antonio Brown lineup, I think you could probably run like almost pure chalk with it.
I think you're right.
We're going to build one at maybe when we build our lineups, we should do one of each, like a cheaper captain and then like a more chalky build. But just so we could show people, like, there's a ton you can do with Antonio Brown at captain. And I still think you feel pretty good about it.
Jordan, let's do this. Flip the topics. Let's build the lineup now. And then we'll throw our bets out there to close this up because we got to be out.
Sorry, Jordan.
Yes. Jordan's putting in work. The guy was up at 5 a.m. today. He's doing this on the West Coast. He's just shouldering a big load over there. He's going to be busy, but we appreciate you, man. We absolutely do. And show your boy Jordan some love in chat. We just hit 115 likes. Appreciate you guys coming in strong. Yeah, let's go ahead and build a lineup, Matt. I think it's a good time to do that. Is it just appropriate here that we start with Antonio Brown first and see what happens?
Yeah, let's do this. And the thing I want to stress, he's projected to get 5% captain ownership. So in like this $12 hypothetical we just laid out where it's a mid-size field tournament, let's say there's like 5,000 entries. Like when you have Antonio Brown at 5% captain, you're already extremely differentiated.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, by the way, who has the highest receptions prop on the Bucs today? Antonio Brown.
See, like it's not that crazy.
It's not.
The 5% ownership to me seems kind of unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, does he have the highest receiving yards prop? No. Again, you and I talked about that, but it's really not lagging far behind Evans, and it's higher than Chris Godwin. So if you're just taking Vegas, and I think it's only fair that we say we should have some respect for Vegas and what they're putting out, that I would argue that guys like Ronald Jones and Antonio Brown are too cheap. And as you pointed out, their captain spot ownership for Antonio Brown is too low. So Jordan, are we set up? We good to go? Thanks, brother. All right, let's go Antonio Brown at captain. God, that opens up a lot, Matt.
Yeah, I think you want to correlate with Brady.
For sure. Okay, so first two, Antonio Brown and Brady. Now, before we fill out the final four flex, do we want to go with a third pass catcher for the Bucs?
You can do a couple things. Like you could do balance. You could do
Ronald Jones even here.
You could go straight onslaught. Like you could go, and you have enough salary for this. You could go, you have Brown in the captain, you have Brady correlated. You could go Godwin, Evans, Ronald Jones, full onslaught, and still have enough for Gallup.
Jeez, that is okay. Yeah, that is a lot.
Like that lineup is crazy.
So if you went Evans, Godwin,
Antonio Brown, Brady, and Ronald Jones, you still have enough for Gallup. With 1.4 left over.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I can't imagine that's going to be the most popular lineup because you have $1,400 remaining, like you said, as well.
But this is so viable. And like, if you want to get weirder, which I don't think you need to, you could like drop Gallup down to a Jarwin, go up to Leonard Fournette. Like you have a ton of versatility here. You also don't have to play like complete onslaught. You know, you could potentially switch out like a Mike Evans for a Dak and throw in a Geo or something.
Let's build one without an onslaught and just see how it looks. So
okay,
we'll go Antonio Brown, Tom Brady, and Godwin. Okay.
Yeah.
And then throw in Dak. So you have 57 per remaining. That means you could go.
This is a situation where you probably end up using like a Geo just because he's so cheap.
You can go Prescott, Gallup, and Ronald Jones. So it's like semi-onslaught. It's 4-2. That's kind of
way more balanced.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
That's another good build.
Yeah, that's nice. And you still have 5% Antonio Brown at captain.
And you have correlated play, Dak to Michael Gallup. You have the semi-onslaught with Tampa Bay. These are really good lineups.
Absolutely. And you guys don't have to make them just like this, but more so just going through the process, because I haven't made lineups yet, Matt. This is the first time I'm making them with you. Okay, who else do you want to go at captain? What was the alternative route you said we'd take here?
A chalk build, like a cash build, a really small field. I think you probably just lock in Brady, wouldn't you say?
Yep.
Brady has the highest projection.
Eric Barlow says every single DFS show is discussing Antonio Brown and captain. If every show is discussing him, there's no way he's 5% on. Yeah, it could change throughout the day for sure.
Yeah, but, so Eric, just watch ownership throughout the day. If he comes up to like 12, then he doesn't become the play he is right now.
Right. But he's still solid because he's just cheap.
Even at 12%, like a 12% captain, like you probably have to get a little weirder, but that's still pretty leveraged.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you, Eric. I could absolutely see it coming up, but just working off the numbers that we have now. And obviously, if Antonio Brown's captain spot comes up, someone else has to come down. And obviously it'll be spread out throughout the pool of players, but it'll be interesting to see where it settles in on for sure. Great. Look, we're still what, 10 hours from almost 11 hours from game time. There's a lot that can change.
And like, I don't think it'll come up that much either. You know, the quarterbacks are going to get ownership. And then like right now, our projected ownership is super flat. It's like CD, Zeke, Godwin, Evans, Amari, all between 8 and 10%.
Yep. I could see like 8% for Antonio Brown, but still, that's not that high.
No. And, you know, it actually kind of speaks to the leverage you're getting with any of these non-quarterbacks today.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's pretty spread compared to what we typically see on Showdown.
Oh, hey, by the way, guys, if you haven't checked out Yahoo yet, head over there and check out all the best ball contests they have, ranging from free to $500. If you still haven't done so, the fantasy draft kit that we have comes equipped with all of your Yahoo stuff, and we'll get you set up for best ball entries for sure. But if you haven't checked it out and you've just been doing other places but haven't gone to Yahoo yet, they've got a lot of awesome stuff. Any type of player you are, it doesn't matter. Also, their DFS platform is great. They're going to have some huge contests there, lower management fees, some no management fees at all. So go over there, yahoos.com. Check out their fantasy product, whether it's best ball, DFS, season long, whatever it is. We still got time before the season kicks off, and I'm looking forward to it. All right, Matt, give me your chalk build captain.
Tom Brady.
Okay. So we got Brady at the captain spot. Gives us 66.40 remaining per player. Very simply here, if we're building a cash lineup, I personally think at 5,600, Antonio Brown has to be in it.
For sure.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay. And then
he is a shockingly low price tag.
Right. Which is why I do, to a large extent, agree with Eric that he will come up. But I don't know how much he'll come up at captain is the thing. He's going to, I think, like you might have even mentioned, but does he come up at utility? Very possible. I don't know how much he comes up at captain.
I agree with you. I think Godwin's another good option.
Let's go Godwin here. So we got Brady, Brown, Godwin.
Now we need to be a little like cognizant of salary.
Yep. 6,300 remaining, which is not too bad. Does Gallup need to get into this lineup is the question. Or do
he
we
probably does, yeah.
Yeah. Now, granted, you get 64 remaining.
Yeah, now we can make some concessions or some upgrades depending on our 2v2. So maybe Gallup doesn't end up in there if we end up with a salary.
Yeah, at this point, really, the question is, do you punt with Gio Bernard and play Dak Prescott or something like that? Because I know it's tough to punt in cash, but it does open up enough to where you'd have Gallup and Dak, and then you'd have Gio in there. Tough for cash, but it is a concept that's at least worth considering.
In cash, I'm fine with playing like a suck up or a Ronald Jones, two really cheap options. I think one of them would be like, especially in cash, kickers are just going to be that low upside, fairly consistent median play that are fine to get you there. And if you use suck up, you have enough for like Amari Cooper, CD Lamb. If you go down even further with Gio, I'm not sure you're getting like a significant upgrade.
Yeah, it would go to Dak basically, and then you'd have Dak Gallup. But yeah, makes sense to me. So basically, if you went suck up, you could get to Zeke. Yeah, you could get to any of those guys up top, which is actually kind of interesting. But that would mean you have Ronald Jones in there along with Godwin, Brown, and Brady, but as 8.5-point favorites with a 30-point implied total, you could do worse.
Yeah, again, we're just like going through the exercise. This isn't what we'll build in cash, but just thinking like median projection, not a huge contest. So having a kicker in there is not going to be a huge deal. Like in things like the Millie, you can have kickers. They need to have ceiling games, but they're more like middling options as opposed to like high ceiling, high floor.
All right, we got to get out of here because we're turning it over to the MLB show. Hopefully you'll stick around for that. But first, Matt, Soul Dope with the super chat says for season long, Antonio Brown, I'm assuming it's Antonio, not AJ, versus Woods versus Pitts.
Woods. If it is AJ Brown, it's AJ Brown.
Yeah, of course. All right, so let's have some fun here. Our top bets, our top props of the day. We'll close it out with this. And as always, Jordan, thanks for producing, brother. Appreciate you. And check out the free content. Single game and showdown top plays are free today at awesemo.com. Usually they're behind paywall. MLB player rankings are also free. And hey, if you didn't follow the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel yet, we're putting out insane content, crushing it over there. Please subscribe to that channel and the Awesemo Odds channel. We hit 1,000 subs on that last night, Matt. So that's exciting.
Let's go.
All right. I'll give you two that I like. Tony Pollard under 35.5 rushing plus receiving yards. But the one I feel most comfortable with, even though we talk about onslaughts and everything, just because I do assume that he is still the bell cow back. He has been a 300 carry guy in multiple seasons. Ezekiel Elliott over 13.5 rushing attempts. The over is really not even juiced. This is a spot to me, Matt, that I will be hitting for sure. Give me Zeke over 13.5 rushing attempts. It is juiced to the over, but I'm still okay with that.
Yeah, I like that. As we talked about, if the game is even close to neutral, they're going to use Zeke. So like that quite a bit. If I'm taking a side in the game, I would look towards the over. We know both teams are fairly pass heavy. Dallas is going to play with pace. Their defense is bad. Should keep them in catch-up mode. As long as they can overcome their individual team total, I think it goes over the overall. For the player props, I like Chris Godwin over 57.5. You have all these receivers priced in sort of a middling range here. But Chris Godwin is depressed a little bit. His receiving projection as far as props goes actually below Antonio Brown. You raised the question, maybe this is because of injury. If it is, I'm even more interested just because he practiced in full yesterday. And if we're getting a depressed prop because of that, I think Godwin's over is the most attractive among Tampa Bay pass catchers.
Love it. Hey, thanks for hanging out as always, guys. This has been fun, Matt. All right, cherry's been popped. Now we just cruise through the season.
Can't
I'll
wait.
talk to you guys soon. Thanks as always for hanging out. Hit that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below. Whatever you want to do. Follow Matt at Matt_Gajewski, myself at Loughy_D, and we'll catch you back here for the next one. Good luck tonight, everyone. We'll see you for the deeper dive in live before lock, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. Peace.